This morning we're going to be reading Romans chapter 5, 1 through 8. Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, and through whom we have gained access by faith into his grace in which we now stand. And we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us.
Before we get into the sermon, I'm going to need a volunteer. Sam, could you come up for just a second? Sam, could you run downstairs and get me some more water? Thanks. Let's give it up for Sam, everybody. Keeping PT hydrated for the duration of the service. There's really no point to that, I just needed water. So if you're waiting for something profound to come of that, you'll be waiting. Good morning.
Good morning.
Glad to see everybody here this morning. Real quick, how many are rooting for the Panthers in today's game? How many are rooting for the Broncos in today's game? Okay, we'll have a moment of prayer for you then. And there he is, right on schedule. Thank you, sir. All right. One of my favorite hymns of all time is Because He Lives, one that we sang today. I remember when it first came out in 1971. Bill and Gloria Gaither put it together. No, when I was a kid growing up, we sang that song a lot in church, and I love the energy of it, and I obviously love the message of it. The message, of course, being that everything that we do as a Christian hinges on the resurrection. Like, if the resurrection didn't happen, then nothing else matters. If the resurrection didn't happen, then there's no reason for us to meet together every week at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. That's how important the resurrection is. If the resurrection doesn't matter, then there's no reason for people to give their lives for a book. So because He lives, we can do all sorts of things. Because He lives, it changes everything. One of my favorites. But here's the thing about the resurrection. If you want to get Easter, you have to go through Good Friday. Easter doesn't happen without Good Friday. The resurrection doesn't happen without the crucifixion. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about that, because the resurrection is important. In fact, the resurrection reminds us that there is hope on the other side of the cross. The resurrection reminds us that there is hope on the other side of the cross, because sometimes all we see is the cross. Sometimes all we feel is the shadow of the cross. Sometimes all we can hear, all we can take in, all that we can even comprehend is the difficulty of the cross. But the resurrection reminds us that there is hope on the other side. Everybody with me? Good, because I'm going to preach about the resurrection today. And I know that's usually an Easter sermon, but I feel like the resurrection should be preached more than once a year. So, you get a bonus resurrection sermon today. We're going to, Lou read a bit from Romans chapter 5, and I just want to touch on that. Paul, writing to the church in Rome, which will become very important later on, obviously. He writes to the church in Rome, Romans chapter 5, and he actually says this. He says, not only so, but we also rejoice in our sufferings, which is crazy talk, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not disappoint us, because God has poured out his love into our hearts by the Holy Spirit, whom he has given us. Paul knew that the cross, the crucifixion, that suffering in and of itself was necessary because it produces character, and character produces perseverance, perseverance produces hope. Essentially what he's saying is the crucifixion created the opportunity for the resurrection. And every day, we face crucifixions that provide us opportunities for a resurrection. The resurrection reminds us that there is hope on the other side of the cross. And so I hope to give you some hope today. That's my hope. We're going to be in Acts chapter 22. Everybody say Acts? Acts. Yeah. We're going to be in Acts 22, very towards the end, Acts 22. And we're going to start. And what I want to do is just kind of lay over some lyrics of that song, Because He Lives. You know the song? Because He lives. And here's the next line. I can face tomorrow. I forgot to change the slide. Here we go. Acts 22. Starting with verse 30. The next day, since the commander wanted to find out exactly why Paul was being accused by the Jews, he released him and ordered the chief priests and all the Sanhedrin to assemble. Then he brought Paul and had him stand before him. Now you remember what's happening, right? Paul, who was told again and again and again by his friends, those who loved him and were concerned about him, to avoid making this courageous decision to go to Jerusalem. But he felt called by God to go. And so he goes and he faces persecution. He faces suffering. And there's this huge crowd that gathers, a riotous crowd that threatens to kill Paul. And the Romans, of all people, come in and pull Paul out of that dangerous situation. They're trying to get some sense of what's going on. They can't because everybody's just yelling and screaming. So they decide we'll just beat Paul up a little bit and then give him back and everything will be fine. Everybody will be happy. They get ready to beat him, you'll remember, and Paul says, is it legal for you to beat a Roman citizen like this before trial? They go, oh no, he's a Roman citizen. We can't do things because Roman citizens have certain rights. And so, lo and behold, Paul gets released from prison, essentially, from custody. But he's ordered to come back and to stand before the Sanhedrin under Roman protection. The Sanhedrin, of course, are the ruling council, the Jewish ruling council. They have their laws, the Book of Moses and other traditions that they have to keep and enforce. So that's what the Sanhedrin were responsible for. They're made up of two groups. The Pharisees, everybody say Pharisees. Pharisees. And the Sadducees. Say Sadducees. You guys just read my mind. You know, right? Good job. Here we go. Into chapter 23. So here's Paul standing before them. Paul looked straight at the Sanhedrin and said, my brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day. At this, the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. That's Christian cursing right there. You sit there to judge me according to the law, yet you yourself violate the law by commanding that I be struck. Those who were standing near Paul said, you dare to insult God's high priest? Paul replied, brothers, I did not realize that he was the high priest, for it's written, do not speak evil about the ruler of your people. Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and others Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, my brothers, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. I stand on trial because of my hope in the resurrection of the dead. And when he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. And then the editor puts this nice little note in there that says, the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, that there are neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. There was a great uproar. Some of the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, stood up and argued vigorously. We find nothing wrong with this man, they said. What if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him? The dispute became so violent that the commander was afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, so he ordered the troops to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him into the barracks. So Paul is standing before the Jewish ruling council, the Sanhedrin, and he says, look, in all good conscience, I've done exactly what God has asked me to do. The high priest at the time, Ananias, who is a different Ananias than we've met before, so don't try and do any connecting. It's a different guy. He orders those who are standing near Paul to smack him across the mouth. Paul's a little peeved at this, as you can imagine, and so he says, how dare you strike me across the mouth, you whitewashed wall? Essentially, he was calling the guy a hypocrite. Looks all nice on the outside, but on the inside, not so much. He says, how dare you strike me? Just by striking me, you break the law. So you're ordering me to be struck because I broke the law, but in ordering me to be struck, you break the law. That makes sense. And so then some of the other officials that are standing there say, hey, you can't talk to the high priest like that. And Paul said, well, I didn't know he was the high priest. Now, this can be taken a couple different ways. One, it can be taken as Paul just literally didn't know. He was ignorant of the fact. I mean, he's been out of Jerusalem for about 20 some odd years. So, you know, positions change, roles change. So maybe he just didn't know. Or, Paul, being the clever one that he is, was actually saying, this guy doesn't act like the high priest. How was I supposed to know he's the high priest? He acts nothing like the high priest. And in fact, if you look back in history at Ananias and the way that he kind of dictated the law, he was a very cruel man. So Paul begins, and he knows, he uses his mind like we talked about last week. He knows who this group is. He knows that there's no way he's going to get a fair trial here. I mean, he's barely said one sentence and he gets smacked across the face. So he says, well, I'm a Pharisee, son of a Pharisee. I believe in the resurrection of the dead. And the Sadducees, who don't believe in the resurrection, they puff up their chest and they start going, well, wait a minute. And the Pharisees say, no, I think he's onto something here. This guy might be all right. And all of a sudden, the whole discussion breaks down, and there's tension, and there's chaos, and there's infighting amongst themselves, and the Roman soldiers are all standing by, watching all this happen. Now, here's what you need to know about Roman soldiers. If they had a prisoner who they were supposed to take care of, and something happened to him, then it was on them. So if they lost a prisoner, or if he was wrongfully killed, or something were to happen, they would have to pay his penalty. So they would die if something happened to Paul. And so they see all this chaos starting to erupt, and so they grab Paul out of there and they pull him out from this dangerous situation. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. And Paul didn't know what was going to happen. All he knew was he had this big trial with the Sanhedrin coming up, and he knew they weren't going to give him a fair shake. They knew they didn't give Jesus a fair shake, so they're not going to give Paul a fair shake. And I'm not sure what's going to happen. The Romans are going to be there. Look at what happens. Chapter 23, verse 11. The following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." Jesus himself comes to Paul the very next night and says, "Hey, man, don't be afraid. Take courage. You've done a good job in Jerusalem. You've testified about me. You've spoken the truth. Now you're going to be moved to a bigger stage. Now you're going to be moved to a bigger audience. Now you're going to have a greater opportunity to testify, to share witness, to speak your experience of transformation. You're going to be able to share the gospel with the Romans. the Romans, the Empire of Rome, the commanders of the world, the conquerors of mankind, the greatest nation of that period, some say of all history, and Paul's going to get the chance to speak the name of Jesus in their capital. It's incredible what God can do. I don't know if you have, but have you ever had to, you're at the beginning of a week and there's a day coming up that you know is going to be difficult? Not impossible, not that, things are dangerous necessarily, but just difficult, hard. For me, that's always funerals. Whether it's one that I'm going to or one that I'm presiding over. I know we'll get through it. It's just hard. It really is. I know the emotions are going to be there. I know the tension's going to be there. I know family's going to bring all their issues, and sometimes past struggles come out during those tough emotional times. And it's not something to look forward to. It's just hard. Maybe it's just Monday. Maybe that's your hard day. You're clinging to the weekend for all it's worth, going, man, I can't do another Monday. You got to drag yourself out of bed just to try and will yourself to work, and you're just looking forward to the next weekend, and the next weekend, and the next weekend, because that Monday is killer. Maybe your boss is a jerk, your coworkers are incompetent, your commute is rage-filled, I don't know. It's just difficult. But the resurrection allows us, allows us the opportunity to face uncertain days. Days that we're not sure how it's going to play out. Days that we're not sure if we can take another step. Days we're not sure if we can go another mile. Days we're not sure if we can face that person, those people, this relationship, this problem. That's what the resurrection does. I mean, put yourself in the disciples' shoes. Jesus says, I'm going to be crucified and buried. 3 days later, I'm going to come back. And people just don't do that. And so the disciples weren't really sure. Jesus was arrested, taken from them in a garden. A couple of them saw the trial, saw how unfair it was. A couple of them actually saw him strung up on the tree, bleeding and naked, and yet they just didn't know. And those 3 days had to be agony. Because if the resurrection didn't happen, their lives were over. Yet the resurrection gives us hope so that we can face those difficult days, so that we can face the uncertainty that comes in life. Everybody still with me? Everybody do me a favor, turn to your left and tell that person to wake up. Now everybody turn to your right and say, I am awake. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. All knew about fear. Look with me in Acts 23, verse 12. The next morning, the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, we've taken a solemn oath not to eat anything until we've killed Paul. Now then, you and the Sanhedrin petitioned the commander to bring him before you on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about his case. We're ready to kill him before he gets here. But when the son of Paul's sister heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him." So he took him to the commander. The centurion said, "Paul, the prisoner, sent for me and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you." The commander took the young man by the hand, drew him aside, and asked, "What is it you want to tell me?" He said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin tomorrow on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about him. Don't give in to them, because more than 40 of them are waiting in ambush for him. They've taken an oath not to eat or drink until they've killed him. They're ready now, waiting for your consent to their request." The commander dismissed the young man and cautioned him, "Don't tell anyone that you've reported this to me." So there's this plot to kill Paul. 40 guys involved in it. Okay, I'm estimating here. There's probably roughly 50 some odd people in here, so take a look around. Okay? Imagine if all of us conspired to kill somebody. With this many people, it would probably happen, right? And so Paul, he's unaware, but lo and behold, because he is a Pharisee, son of a Pharisee, his sister, his family still had ties to the Pharisees. We don't know much about his sister or his extended family, by the way. But it seems they were close enough, at least, to hear this conversation going on. And Paul's nephew, who wanted to save his favorite uncle, comes running to Paul and says, Paul, Uncle Paul, these guys want to kill you. This is what they said. And he said, "Okay, well, let's tell the Roman commander." So he gets the centurion, says, "Go get the commander, take this little guy to him." And so they take him to the commander. We don't know how old the nephew is. I'm guessing he's relatively young because the commander takes him by the hand, it says. Kind of draws him to the side and says, "Okay, buddy, what do you need to tell me?" He says, "Well, these guys want to kill my Uncle Paul because of all this, so they're going to ask you to see him again, but you can't do it because there's 40 guys waiting to kill him." "Okay, well, don't tell anybody. We'll take care of it." Man, I don't think I've ever been the subject of a death threat, but that would terrify me if I knew that 40 men were trying to kill me. You know, I think, when I think about fear, I always think about Psalm 23. You probably do too. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff will comfort me." Sometimes there are moments in life where we're just scared. Like, it's beyond just hard, but it's scary. Moments where you don't know how or why or when or who. You don't know if deliverance is going to come. You don't know if the bills are going to get paid. You don't know if they're ever going to come back. You don't know if they're ever going to make contact. You don't know if or how or when or why. You know, when Parker was born, of course, that night was crazy. Scariest night of my life. And there were all sorts of things running through my mind, like, okay, Rachel could have a stroke. She could have, mental problems after that. She could have heart issues, or she could die. She could bleed out on the table. So maybe I'm a single dad. Or Parker, man, he's going to be born so young, so little. So it's pretty common for them to have mental disabilities, and so maybe we're going to be raising a challenged kid. Or maybe he's not gonna make it, and it'll just be us, and we'll have to deal with that. Or maybe I'll lose them both. And yet, I was called. Now, that doesn't make sense. Because by all rights, I should have been freaking out. I was called. See, the resurrection gives a calm assurance that it's going to be okay. Yeah, it's scary. Yeah, it's hard. But it's okay. It's okay. Jesus was crucified. And they thought, okay, maybe he just won't die. He did. And they thought, well, maybe he's just faking it. They'll pull him off the cross and he'll just hop up and it'll be great. But he didn't. Well, maybe they'll wait till they get to the tomb, and as soon as they turn their back, he'll be gone. But he was buried. And the tomb was sealed. And there's that seed of doubt, that seed of fear that says, man, what if this is the end? But God has a way of providing hope. And the resurrection is the prime example of that says, look, I don't care how scary it is. I know that hurts and I'm here for you. I don't care how big the obstacle is. I don't care about any of that because I have conquered death and I love you and I am here for you. It's going to be okay. And so there we were. Parker had been born. We had talked and cried and slept and cried and trying to figure out, man, what's going to happen? We've got all these bills. I don't even know the final number. It was big. What's going to happen? And funny enough, God provides, man. Like a couple months into it, we brought Parker home and get a knock at the door, or a ding dong, I don't remember. Maybe it was knocked by a ding dong. But somebody's at the door. So we go to the door, and this guy who says, hey, I'm with Nielsen Media. I was just wondering if you'd like to be a part of a test group. What are you trying to steal from me? Right? Like that's kind of the feeling. He's like, no, it's not. We're legit. We want to pay you to watch TV. Say, what? Yeah, it's real simple. We want to pay you to watch TV. Okay. So he goes through the thing, and for the last 2 years, we just wrapped it up, which is why I can actually talk about it. We were part of Nielsen, and they tested and kept track of what we watched and paid us for it. God has a funny way of providing. You know what's interesting? Paul is there. Unbeknownst to him, people are plotting to kill him. And who comes to his rescue? I'll tell you who it wasn't. It wasn't the church. Ooh. Who was it? It's the Romans. The guys with the pointy sticks and the funny hats. The Jews, the good religious folks, they're the ones gathering together in a secret little meeting saying, how can we get rid of this guy? And the Romans are the ones taking little kids by the hand and saying, come on, buddy, what do you need to tell me? The Romans saved Paul so that he could go. God used them. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future. And sometimes the future is the scariest thing of all, isn't it? Let's go back to Acts 23. Verse 23. Then the Roman commander called 2 of his centurions and ordered them, "Get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at 9 tonight. Provide mounts for Paul so that he may be taken safely to Governor Felix." Let me just stop right there for just a moment. 40 people threatened to kill Paul, and God provided 470 to protect him. He wrote a letter, the commander did, as follows. "Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency, Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews, and they were about to kill him, but I came with my troops and rescued him, for I had learned that he was a Roman citizen." Gotta make yourself look good, of course. "I wanted to know why they were accusing him, so I brought him to the Sanhedrin. I found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law, but there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment. When I was informed of a plot to be carried out against this man, I sent him to you at once. I also ordered his accusers to present to you their case against him." So the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul with them during the night and brought him as far as Antipatris. The next day they let the cavalry go on with him while they returned to their barracks. When the cavalry arrived in Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor and handed Paul over to him. The governor read the letter, asked what province he was from. Learning that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will hear your case when your accusers get here." Then he ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace. So Paul goes from being in the middle of chaos, in the middle of a death threat, in the middle of riot, everybody's threatening to kill him. Just a couple days ago, he was in prison, common prison, which was not a place you wanted to be. To now, he has an armed guard of 470 Roman soldiers who pull him and transport him away from the danger, away from the 40 men plotting to kill him, as far as Antipatris, and then the rest of the way to Caesarea, where Governor Felix, who can provide a much more stable, much more safe environment for Paul so that he can have a fair trial, takes custody. Interesting that Paul goes from common prison to the Herod's palace. He holds the future. I don't know what 2016 is going to be like. I know it's a little scary. You want your leader to be able to lay out a beautiful vision and all the details of what things are going to look like and how it's going to play out, but I don't know. Nobody does. Not walking on planet Earth, anyway. And so we're left with all sorts of questions because we don't know the future. Will Park Street Church's average attendance bump up to 100? Maybe. Will Park Street Church's average attendance drop to 40? Maybe. Will there be a Republican in the White House? Maybe. Will there be a woman in the White House? Maybe. Will there be a Democrat in the White House? Maybe. Will there be a black man in the White House? Maybe. Will there be? Maybe. Well, maybe. But here's the thing. I don't know what the future holds. But I know who holds the future. Let me say it again because it was good. I don't know what the future holds. But I know who holds the future. So if Park Street Church's attendance goes up or down, God is still in control. No matter who ends up in the White House, God is still in control. And that is all that matters. See, the resurrection changes everything because the resurrection proves God's faithfulness. He said, I will be back in 3 days. You can write it down in ink. You can seal it with a stamp. People said, gosh, I don't know. And lo and behold, 3 days later, up from the grave he rose. Because God is faithful. A lot of times we think that our faith is all about what we can do for God, but our faith starts and it ends with what God has done for us. And that is the importance of the resurrection. That is why we can take a step forward. That is why we can meet and do this in the safety of our glorious country. That is why we can say His name out loud and worship Him and give Him all the praise and the glory that He deserves, more than we could ever possibly give, because He is faithful. And that changes everything. And so Paul is going to head to Rome. Just like God said he would. Because He lives, I can face tomorrow. Because He lives, all fear is gone. Because I know He holds the future, and life is worth living just because He lives. But not everybody believes that. Just this week, BMX legend Dave Mirra, who holds several bicycling records and extreme sports medals, at the age of 41, apparently committed suicide. Read another story about two teenage girls, both 13, classmates, good friends, who committed suicide. Analysts say that it's a disturbing trend how students within that age bracket, 13 to 19, suicide rate has been on the climb the last 5 years. Hundreds of thousands of people attempt suicide every single day. In fact, it averages out to about 1 every 38 seconds. And so in the time since I started preaching, about 63 people have attempted suicide. A guy by the name of Morris wrote an article, gathered several different stories, and he says this. For 50 years, Don Ritchie was the guy with the most unusual hobby in Australia. When other men were learning to barbecue or boomerang or whatever it is that Australians do all day, Ritchie sat at home, quietly looking out the window. That might not sound so unusual, but Ritchie had a very specific purpose in mind. He and his wife lived at the top of a Sydney suicide hotspot, and Ritchie had made it his mission to stop as many jumpers as possible. From 1964 to 2012, he watched over this stretch of cliff face, wandering down to anyone who looked upset and simply asking, "Can I help you in some way?" Amazingly, this low-key approach seemed to work. And when he died in 2013, Ritchie was credited with saving a minimum of 164 lives. An accolade usually reserved for war veterans and Superman. Again, that's a minimum. Some people estimate the number is much, much higher. Either way, Ritchie's combination of insane determination and calm patience saved hundreds of families from losing someone they love. One of the worst things about being young, this is a different story, is the way passing things seem somehow permanent. So when an unnamed 16-year-old in China faced yet another example of fate raining all over his incredibly poor family, he decided to step out rather than suffer a life of torment and misery. Climbing over the railing of a pedestrian bridge, he prepared to jump, at which point a passing waitress named Lu Wenshu decided to get involved. Despite having never seen the kid before, despite knowing nothing of his problems, she followed him to the railing and did the only thing that she could do. She listened. She listened as this random 16-year-old described the pit his life had fallen into. She listened as he listed the endless problems tearing his family life to bits. And then she simply showed him her wrists. As they stood there, surrounded by cops and gawking pedestrians, Lou told him the story behind her own attempted suicide. Quietly, firmly, without any contrivances. When she was done, she leaned forward, hugged the boy, and gave him a kiss. And the boy suddenly decided that maybe life was worth living after all. All Lou had done was something that no one else had ever thought to do. She'd given the kid her full attention and really listened. And that little slice of kindness was all it took to save his life. Now, all these stories have been about specific people, groups of people who did the right thing or when faced with the worst circumstances. This one won't be. Instead, it's about anonymous, regular people, the ordinary, faceless friends and strangers who make life worth living. A while back, the author came across this thread on Reddit. What started as someone idly wondering what suicides do on their last day quickly became a collection of some of the most heartbreaking tales you will ever read. Hundreds of near suicides posted their stories of abuse and misery and a brush with death. Some of them are heavy reading, but they all have one thing in common. People. Friends who saw the posters feeling lost and offered them their time. Family members who helped them through the dark days of depression. Strangers who stood next to them on an empty bridge and offered to take them home. Stories of parents, sons, sisters, mothers who came so close but realized at the last moment there was someone out there who still loved them. I guess that's what I'm trying to say with this whole article. There are always people who will miss you when you go, no matter how hopeless things might feel. There are always people willing to help, even if it doesn't seem like it at the time. And reading the stories of all these anonymous posters is perhaps the most touching way of finding that out. See, there are a lot of people who come to a point in their lives where they feel like it's just not worth anything. Feel like no one will miss them. Feel like no one cares. The resurrection makes life worth it. Because it is God's way of saying, I care. It is God's way of saying, you have value. You have worth. Not for what you can do. Not for what you've accomplished. And it's not based on what you've said. It's not based on what you've done. It's not based on your last name. It's not based on what church you go to necessarily. It's not based on who you are. It's based on whose you are. You are my child. And I love you. And there is nothing you can do to change that. If you don't believe me, look at the cross. I gave my son for you. And it wasn't faked and it wasn't staged, and he felt every bit, he felt every ounce of agony, he felt it all, and I did that for you. Not because I want the attention, not because I need the glory, not because I needed anything from you, but because I love you, I gave my only son. And so the resurrection makes life worth it. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. Would you sing that? that with me? Because He lives, I can face tomorrow. Because He lives, all fear is gone. Because I know He holds the future, and life is worth the living just because He lives. Sing that one more time. Because He lives, I can face tomorrow, no matter how difficult. Because He lives, all fear is gone, even the fear of death. Because I know He holds the future. I trust Him. And life is worth the living just because He lives. Yours and mine and all of our lives are worth it because God has given His all for us. He has called us His children. And so we